Hello and welcome to the overview of Chapter 20. We are looking at types of goods and the public-private goods that are out there. I start off by this chapter by looking and asking you a question, looking at this picture. How can you harness the sunset? How would you make that work for you? Maybe you had a property that you were you had access to the beautiful sunset on the water. Maybe it's a restaurant. Maybe it's a park. How would you harness the value of the sunset? That is kind of what we look at in this chapter, looking at public and private goods. So we're going to look at different types of goods. We're going to come back to that sunset in a moment. We're going to look at the different types of goods that are out there, both public and private, and excludable and non-excludable, rival and non-rival in consumption. We'll go through all of those details in a moment. So we're going to look at the public goods, we're going to look at some common resources, and also look at government intervention as we wrap up the chapter, as well as a couple of just odds and ends, looking at some cost curves and types of taxes as we wrap up the chapter, and we wrap up the semester worth of content in this last chapter. Don't forget there are explainers with links to help provide you with all kinds of resources and explainers for additional knowledge and information, and I definitely leave it to the experts for some of these, but if there's a concept you don't understand, definitely click on one of the links that you see in the slides. Those are also available in Canvas under modules for this chapter. Okay, or this unit. We look at in this chapter, we look at public and private goods, and we're going to look at the role of government in those market failures, if you will. And I go back to the sunset, the idea of harnessing the sunset. How would you take advantage of this situation? How would you pay for it? How would you allow your property or your business, your institution, to make money off of this great opportunity, and that is what leads us to the different types of goods we're going to look at in this chapter in terms of breaking it down and also addressing what we call the free rider problem. How is it that we can how can we prevent free riders from taking advantage of the sunset when we have a property that we may or may not have exclusive access to? So that's also tying into the types of goods. So let's look at what those are. So there are basically four different types of goods that we're going to look at in this chapter. The first one is private goods. Now they are, notice they are rival in consumption, meaning you're using them up, and they're also excludable. You're going to buy them. So if you go into Home Depot and you buy a bathroom fixture, you buy it. No one else can use it because you have bought it. So that's excludable. And it's rival in consumption because you're using up the product that you have purchased. Now, artificially scarce goods in the green box are also excludable, but they're non-rival in consumption. So a pay-per-view or a streaming service like Netflix or HBO Max or Disney Plus, those would be non-rival in consumption because I can sell millions of subscriptions to those services, but they are excludable in that if you don't pay for them, I can shut you out. And so the magic of technology really advancing that artificially scarce good category. Now let's go to the non-excludable types of goods. If we look at common resources, this is a good example of non-excludable. We can't say, oh, well, you can't have this because you haven't paid into it. So clean water is a great example here. It is rival in consumption that people can use it up. Remember, we talked about tragedy of the commons in the last chapter. That is definitely at work here in the common resources. But it's also important to keep in mind some of the biodiversity is hard to be non-excludable as well. And that is rival in consumption, which kind of leads us into the last category, the gold box, which is public goods. Public goods are those things like public sanitation and national defense in which they're not excludable. I can't say, well, you get it, but you don't. Your neighbors get it, but you don't. That doesn't work that way. Everybody gets national defense. But it's also non-rival in consumption in that you're not going to use it up just because all of your neighbors have national defense. Because you use public sanitation, your neighbors are still going to be able to use public sanitation too. So that is a public good that is provided because it is both non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. And we're going to break down a couple of these categories. So if we look at public goods, some of the examples of public goods that we see today are schools and parks and highways, interstates, freeways. We have the public sector, which is basically government controlling all of that. But then the private sector is where either consumers or individuals, businesses, companies, corporations are profiting or looking, again, marginal cost equals marginal benefit. They're looking at how they can make money off of it because people respond to incentives. So that is very much public goods in the differences between the two. So why do governments provide these public services? Well, because there's no real incentive to make it work for a profitable school. It is better for everybody to pay into the system and to provide some of the most cutting edge school system that you have here in Montgomery County Public Schools in the country. 15th largest in the country, and definitely in the top 10 in terms of instruction and experience. And the reason for that is because of people in Montgomery County that have said, we want to pay more in taxes in order to put more money into our public schools. And even in the state of Maryland, we address that, right? Because you look state to state, we are always in the top 10. In states that focus on education, and not all states around us also are in the top 10 as a result of that. They don't put as much money into public education as we do, and there is a cost to that in terms of the benefits that they derive from it. So there are some free rider problems that we'll talk about in a second, but that's the idea of public goods and why some of those goods have to be provided by government. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't private institutions that, like private schools, that you can go to. We have several in the Bethesda area and in Montgomery County that provide private school education, and a very good one at that. But to be able to do it for the 160,000 students or whatever that we have in Montgomery County Public Schools, be very hard for them to do with that size and scale. That economies of scale is much harder there. And in terms of handling that, they would need a lot more infrastructure, a lot more, and that would cost a lot more to do as well. So it doesn't mean that they couldn't do it. It just means that where they are right now, to ramp up and do that would be much more difficult for them. And so that's why we have public goods and public goods that are non-rival and non-excludable. Everybody gets an opportunity for that. So looking at this picture, what is wrong with it? Well, we're sitting on a beach. You're telling me you're going to sell me a ticket to view the sunset. It's going to cost $10. And if this is a public beach, I'm sitting on the beach, why would I pay you $10, right? And that's the free rider problem, which is we have a lot of people who may download music and do it illegally. They may do the same thing with movies, right? People who hear street musicians in the metro or street performers on the street and don't give them any money. These are free riders. These are people that are benefiting from the societal benefits that are going on, the marginal social benefit, but aren't necessarily paying into that structure, not a part of the marginal public cost that is being paid. Teenagers living at home. I would argue probably 20-somethings also probably living at home with the same type of structure. So that is part of the free rider problem. And people who jump the turnstiles on the metro and go in, and you noticed in the news they've been trying to cut down on the number of people that are free riding on the metro, and the reason is because it costs money and services that are being taken away from others in terms of providing services with the funds that are paid for with metro fares. So that is trying to clamp down on the free rider problem. Now I shift gears to talk for a second about why Domino's Pizza would be paving roads. Think about that for just a second. Why would Domino's Pizza provide a public good that society should be paying for And Domino's Pizza is obviously advertising on the side of it, which is really quite smart on a number of levels. One, the advertising is probably not paying for the entire road, so that's a benefit to them. They really look like, it's their people that are out there paving for pizza. But it's also help to their delivery drivers to get there more efficiently and effectively to the houses that have ordered the pizza, so that they can provide the pizza to the consumer and the customer, and then get on to the next customer or the next house with their pizza, if being more efficient with that time. That is significant here, and that is a benefit to Domino's and a benefit to society in terms of the people that use the road, as well as the people that order Domino's Pizza. All of those things are benefiting society as a whole and providing those public goods that we talk about. So in this regard, that's why public goods are non-exclusionary. We can't exclude people from it. Hey, you can ride on this highway that Domino's Pizza paved, but you can't. It doesn't work that way. But we're also sharing that consumption. It is non-rival. And so it doesn't mean that you can't drive on that road too. It doesn't mean that somebody else can't drive on that road. And we share that consumption. Now, it doesn't mean that we're also, not going to get to a point where we have too many people on the road. That's a different set of circumstances that, for simplistic reasons, we're going to leave alone for now. But the idea there is that a public good is non-rival and non-excludable, and that is a benefit to society as a whole. Now, let's switch gears and kind of talk about our last topic, which is this idea of government intervention. We have a number of ways that government does intervene in terms of trying to address different markets. We've kind of seen these already in monopolies, breaking up monopolies, and the trust busters. We saw the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 that basically broke up monopolies. We saw this at the turn of the 1900s with some of the large companies that were busted up in the trust busting phases of Roosevelt and whatnot. The idea is because as these companies have more market power and have no accountability, they can jack up prices and consumers have to pay it. And that creates market failure. Then consumers are mad because they're paying more for the same amount or less product that they're getting, and think shrinkflation in that regard. And so governments have to step in and regulate, a lot of times because of pricing concerns, but also because of efficiencies related to those monopolies and those regulations. So price ceilings can step in here, but a lot of times they break up monopolies because they're worried that they're not perfectly competitive or even monopolistically competitive anymore. And so they will use price controls, sometimes taxes. That doesn't usually work as well because, again, it's limiting the supply as opposed to encouraging production and bringing down costs. And so that would be one aspect. Now, remember, allocatively efficient production would be at a socially optimal level. That would be where marginal cost meets demand or price. And then fair return or break even, that was our average cost, and that would be where ATC meets price, and that's usually only in long run for perfectly competitive firms, right? Minimum ATC, break-even status, that's where you're going to be at minimum return. That's going to be fair return pricing in that regard. Natural monopoly, we see this a lot where government steps in and creates a natural monopoly, allows one company to have economies of scale and run the gamut. And why do they do that? Because they want them to have enough money to be able to keep functioning and operating, and to do it at a low cost to pass along those cost savings to their customers. So that's really important for natural monopolies. Again, looking at, and this is just kind of review on natural monopolies to some extent, but unregulated, again, they're going to produce at M equals MR. That's the quantity they're going to produce at of a natural monopoly. You're going to take that M equals MR quantity up to the demand curve that sets the price at monopoly, and then down to ATC would determine this box being profit, and then everything beneath it being cost. Now, fair return would be at where your demand, your price essentially is at demand meets ATC. That would be here. And as a result of that, that would be fair return or average cost. In this case, you're breaking even. Over here at marginal cost meets demand, notice you're below ATC. So socially optimal wouldn't have deadweight loss, but it also would be you'd be operating at a loss. So you wouldn't be operating very long. So most natural monopolies are not regulated to a socially optimal price. And the reason for that is because of what we see here. This idea of a socially optimal price having an impact on ATC. And if you're not making money, you're losing money. And in that, you're either going to need a subsidy, as it calls for here in this slide, or you're going to need to shut down if you're not meeting AVC. And so nobody wants that to happen. So that's where government steps in to regulate and either provide a subsidy or allow them to produce at either ATC meets demand or at the market price of MC equals MR up to the demand curve. That's essentially what we see. Just a reminder on shifting cost curves. Remember, when we have a change in fixed costs, this is going to affect ATC, but not MC. It's not going to affect marginal cost. Variable costs would affect ATC as well as MC and AVC. But a change in fixed costs, so if you had a tax, for instance, that was a per unit tax, that would affect variable cost. A lump sum would affect the fixed cost because lump sum would be to the whole thing, not to individual, which would be marginal. So a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy would impact the variable cost changes, which would be ATC, AVC, and MC or marginal cost. And what does that look like? Well, just what you see here. It goes from MC at supply 1, shifting leftward inward to MC2, and you can see here that when there is a per unit tax, the shift is inward leftward, leading to a greater price level because obviously the variable costs are going up, and a smaller quantity being produced. If there is a subsidy that's being imposed, that's going to bring down AVC and bring down marginal cost. So the MC is going to shift rightward or outward, leading to a greater supply being produced in that respect because of the subsidy. So if you have fixed costs that increase, and again, like I said, if there's a change to the lump sum tax or a lump sum subsidy, that's going to affect ATC. That's not going to affect MC. So MC, notice, isn't moving. It's just ATC that's moving in that respect. So per unit tax or subsidy would affect the variable costs. That includes MC, marginal cost. A lump sum tax or subsidy would only affect fixed cost and ATC. Everything else stays the same. Okay. All right, the last piece of this puzzle then is looking at inequality and the Lorenz curve. So why is it that a homeless person makes no money, meanwhile Oprah Winfrey makes $2.6 billion a year? And this is satisfied by the Lorenz curve, or this idea of income inequality. Because we encourage capitalism, this idea of you work hard, you do well, you create an empire of products that you sell, and you make lots of money. Think Oprah, think Google, think Apple, the list goes on. You get to, once you've paid Uncle Sam, you get to enjoy those profits, and that accounts for the unequal distribution. So you will notice that the idea here is we don't have an obviously rich society when the average American family makes under $100,000, but it is measuring the income of the quintiles of society that really help us in this regard. So we've also got a gap between rich and super rich, which again is caused by that Lorenz curve, that income inequality, which is what we're going to take a look at here. So this Lorenz curve essentially measures income distribution in quintiles, 20%, 20%, 20%. There's a fifth in each quintile is about 20% of society. So if we break those up into 20%, 20%, 20%, what we find is that we have the poorest 20% is about 5% of total income. The 10%, the group number 2, that that 40% or below would be 10% plus the 5, which would be about 15% of society. And then everybody in the 60% of income distribution or below would make up about 30% of society. So think about that. 60% of society earns about 30% of the income. And that's what we see in groups 1, 2, and 3. Now we get to the upper brackets, and you'll see that the fourth group, second to the highest, essentially has 25% of the income, and the highest group has about 45% of the income. So if you look at the top two groups, they essentially have 70% of all of the income in the country. Those top two groups. So 40% of the people, 70% of the income. And the richest 20% have 45, almost half of it for the richest 20%. So how do we graph this? We look at what we call the Lorenz curve, which is this idea of an equality line, upward sloping equality curve. And then what we do is we log those income distribution levels that we just talked about. So we can see them here. And what we see is kind of a banana, a kind of a banana of the degree of income inequality, which anything veering away from that upward sloping equality curve would be an inequality of income. That is taking place. And in our society, we can see that that kind of creates a banana, if you will, of society here. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there is a significant income inequality among those 5 quintiles, among those groups. And the effect of that is that you have you probably heard the phrase, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. That's essentially what we see in this Lorenz curve. Excuse me. You see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and so you have more income inequality with a higher number on that Gini coefficient. And you may have studied this in comparative government class. But when you have a higher number on that Gini coefficient, you can see there's more income inequality. A lower number would mean less inequality. You'd be closer to income perfect equality, and obviously closer to that straight line, that upward sloping equality curve that we see there. So after the distribution with government transfer payments and such, what are they doing? They're trying to bring society back into that perfect equality curve. It is not a perfect science, as you can see. So they do try and make those adjustments, and they are not perfect, which is why you see some of the gap there as the curve moves upward. But it is where government tries to provide unemployment benefits and food stamps and other types of unemployment benefits to people who are not working or fall below the poverty line or low income. And the reason is to try and provide more income equality in society as a whole. You can pause the video here and kind of do a deeper dive into the different countries that have the most inequality. You can see it is pretty broad. And you can see the United States over there, probably about 7th from the right, 7th or 8th, yeah, 7th from the right in terms of that income inequality. Obviously, the greater the number, as I mentioned, the greater the inequality. And so those ones on the right would be more income inequality. The ones on the left, less so. All right, just as an addendum, I want to talk about types of taxes because that is kind of mentioned here, and then we will wrap up the chapter. There are reasons, and we've kind of talked about them going back to chapter 4, why government taxes individuals and businesses and provides Pigouvian taxes along the way to disincentivize, or Pigouvian subsidies to subsidize and encourage incentives. But taxes are basically these mandatory payments that are made to the government to help the cost of governing. But they are also trying to incentivize or disincentivize people or businesses to either not do something or do something. And so a lot of times they are providing public goods, funding those programs we just talked about with the Lorenz curve, income inequality and such, and trying to encourage different types of economic behavior. With Pigouvian taxes, they're trying to discourage people from buying products that are harmful to their health, like cigarettes or pollution. And they're trying to, with Pigouvian subsidies, trying to encourage investment and growth in areas like the Riverwalk or like the business improvement districts that we see. And so those are all using different types of taxes and subsidies to try and address those needs. There are three types of taxes. The first one is progressive. That is the one that we use in the United States today. I like to call it the more you make, the more they take, because that is essentially the concept of progressive taxes. It is progressively taking more of your money as you move up the income brackets. Proportional taxes is kind of a flat rate tax. So that is no matter what income level you are, everybody pays the same percentage of income in the tax. And so obviously that would be a greater tax for people on the lower end of the spectrum, on the lower end of the Lorenz curve, and obviously a benefit to people who made more money because they wouldn't be paying as much in taxes proportionally as those that are on the lower income level. And then regressive taxes, think of that like a sales tax, a tax on goods that you're consuming. We've seen a lot of that in terms of a value-added tax. And this is more, especially when you're taxing groceries, is more of a tax on poor people. And the reason for that is because a larger percentage of people who aren't making as much money end up paying more of their income on a regressive tax because they don't make as much money. So that is a disadvantage for them in that regard. And so a regressive tax is more of a tax on the poor. And the reason is because they're going to spend more of their money on consumption by buying things that they need in order to live than someone who is wealthy and is just going to brush that off as a cost of doing business. So those are the three different types of taxes we see throughout society. And again, the most common one is the progressive tax, which is the one we have in the United States today. So think of this in terms of different taxes. What is the percentage of income if you had to pay $1 a day for a toll road tax? Or if richer citizens paid a higher percentage of income tax? Or if you had to pay a tax on cigarettes? Or for every dollar that you earn, a percentage of money went into the Medicare taxes. Or there was a higher tax rate in sales in California than in the state of Maryland, which is true. So these are different types of taxes that governments have imposed, and reasons for doing so are various. But the idea is they are trying to address the issue of taxes and why society needs taxes in order to pay for public goods or those types of goods that are needed in society today. And that wraps up our chapter. You can pause it here and kind of go through these questions. These are really good to kind of draw out. If you can't answer these, then you do want to go back through the slides and take a look at the chapter in terms of what's going on here and how can I better answer that question. But these are some good examples of review questions that will get you ready for the upcoming mega quiz and also the semester test. Here are the key terms from Chapter 20 as we look at types of goods, both public and private, rival and non-rival in consumption, excludable and non-excludable in nature. And then again, don't forget about the great resources, explainers from the experts talking about these topics that I've talked about here today. Here are the answers to the Chapter 20 questions. And again, you can look at the slides if you need more time or pause it here for the Chapter 20 take-home quiz packet. But those are the answers to the multiple choice. You can always find those as well as the answers with explanations and the P&Es, the answers to the P&Es on Canvas under modules for this chapter. You will find that Take-Home Quiz Answers with Explanations is the name of that document, of that PDF document. And then Mr. Rodman hasn't given you this yet, but he will. And this is the sample questions for chapters 19 and 20. Again, good practice questions as you get ready for the quest, the mega quiz, and the semester test, and ultimately for the AP exam. Some really good questions there. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you'll live that 5. I know you will. Keep doing what you do. And don't forget, hashtag live the 5, hashtag econ is life.